Hey, welcome guys, Dalton here again, and today we're discussing some line. This is a very big discussed topic amongst anglers, and in every angler's bag you'll find a range of line depending on what type of fishing is into. So since we're doing mostly carp fishing, I'm going to discuss the carp line that we use, that I am fond of, and absolutely you can differ with me, and lots of anglers probably will, but this is the one that I've used, and in the club that I'm in and the guys that I mix with mostly tend to use this line, and that's what you'll find. Line works with recommendation. So if your friends recommend something, or you know somebody that's fished with it and you've seen someone pull a couple of fish with some line, you've seen what the line looks like after a year or two, or after 5 sessions or 3 sessions, whatever it is that you're measuring stick. But if you've seen this work for a friend, then you'll tend to believe in it. This is the leader line I'm using from Sensation. It's a 30-pound line, 0.45. Now obviously you can go a whole lot thinner on this line. You don't have to go this thick. And then I've got the hook line, which is also from Sensation. That is 8-pound line, 0.22. And then I'm also using this 0.25 line from Aoshima. This is the preferred line that I have for all my rigs. Although if you are fishing a little bit lighter and you're a competitive angler, you'll go as small as possible, as thin as possible on your hook line. Then on my casting lines, I've got high abrasion double X line that I'm very fond of, and that's about 0.21 that I use there. That's 7-pound line that I will put on any of my reels. And in general, that is the line you'll find on most of my reels, because they can take quite a bit of a punch compared to your lighter lines. You can go 10-pound on your lines. I don't use 10-pound line, but you'll find that some venues will request that you have a minimum of 0.25 line on your reel, and they'll come check up on that. So if the venue requires that, then you'll have to go 10-pound and higher, of course. Then this is pearl line. I found this line last year. Very, very impressed with this line. It says 600 meters on here, but when you buy it, they give you an extra 600 meters. You know, it's 1,200 meters for about $100, $120, somewhere there. Very, very good line. Obviously, you just have to change it a whole lot more frequently than the others. Double X, again, I love the double X line, that 600 meter line. And then I use this particular one for distance casting. So this is like your 5-pound line in general. This is the cheaper platinum one that I found. They do get quite expensive for this line. So you'll see that this is 0.16. And I know if you're an amateur at this, you're going to ask yourself, what difference is there between a 0.21 and a 0.16? There can be no difference. But for distance casting, if you need that extra 20, 30 meters, 40 meters, this is exactly the kind of line that you'll be using. Then obviously a more expensive line that I really, really enjoy, and that is our Aoshima line. If I can afford it, like this one over here, I'll put that on my best reels, and you'll see it's a 0.18. Our Aoshima line tends to be, for thinner line, it can take a whole lot more punch. Now, you'll see that they've got the thickness of the line, or the size of the fish it can take, a 4.5 kilo. That is not true. I'll explain this a bit later, but line doesn't work that way. It's not because it says that, on this line 2.27, that's the weight of the fish you can pull out with it. Lots of guys tend to think that if you want to pull out a 20 kilo carp, you need 20 kilo line, and that's not always the case. Then the last one I've got over here is Braid. Now, I wouldn't recommend you buy this Braid. I picked it up at China Mall, very cheap, up at about $50 for 500 meters. The only reason I'm showing you this is for those guys that don't know, what Braid looks like. I'll also be speaking about that. A lot of specimen guys you'll find is using Braid, and as I said to you, this is the line that I picked up at China Mall. I wouldn't recommend you buy from China Mall. If you invest in Braid, absolutely go for the best. But there's nothing wrong with this Braid. The only problem with it is I don't know whether it's sinking Braid or floating Braid. So to be honest with you, I would never ever rig up any of my reels with this. What I would do, however, is rig up a little small reel, maybe a 2,500 or that, and I'll use it for my kids, because it's got such a great breaking strength that you know that they won't struggle to get a fish out when they're busy fighting a fish. The nice thing about Braid that I absolutely love is how sensitive it is. So when you're busy fighting a fish on this line, you can feel absolutely every tug, every pull, and that you have to love. Obviously, when you're taking out, your mono line, there's a lot more stretch in the line. You know, you can stretch this line for quite a bit. I remember some guys did a video where they dropped their line over, I think it was over 400 or 500 meters, and by the time the fish pulled the line and the alarm went off on the bank, the fish had already gained about 20 meters or 10 meters or something like that. So that is the stretch that this line has. Each fishing scenario will have its own requirements of line, and that's what you need to consider. Okay, so you've rigged up your lines, you're ready to go. What I would absolutely recommend, if you're really going cheap and you're buying, you know, some gear that's already have some line on, it's got some thick line on. You know, the Afrikaans guys like to call it bowline. This is your building line. It's quite thick, and a lot of guys tend to think that if you use that line, you can get bigger fish. That is not true. I've used this line a few times, and a specific scenario I remember was when we were fishing at Bloemhof Dam, and one of my friends went out with a boat, and he wanted to drop, you know, my lines, and it was about 200 meters, and this was a simple 10-pound line. And I just held him back with my rod and line. This guy weighs about 70 kilos in a boat, and I was able to pull him back in the water. So this is a 70-kilo person that I could pull back with this line. It is very, very strong. So don't underestimate the strength of 5-pound line or 7-pound line. But obviously, you are going to need to put a leader on that for casting, because when you cast this thin line, you tend to throw the sinker, whatever you're casting, right off. So we usually put a leader on that's about double the length of your rod, and that is what you will use then to just break that tension from your thinner line going to something thicker. Then what I would recommend is on your leader line. So this leader line I've got here is 0.45. I actually just use this particular line for a certain type of rig that I make. Usually I'm fishing with around 0.35 leader, and that is what I would recommend for you, 0.35 leader. You'll see this leader is, that's the thickness of it is 0.45, and the breaking strength is 30 pounds, which is strong enough for what we needed to do. You can go a lot thinner on that. Remember, when you try and put a thick leader onto very thin lines, you're going to struggle with the knots. And I'll take you through knots at another session like this. But for now, I want to show you a little trick that I use. What I do is, before fishing session, I actually roll up all my leaders. So I tie about 20 of these leaders. I make a simple, you know, double overhand knot. I tie that snap swivel on, and then I measure out the length of another leader. So I'll make sure that I go to the dam with about 20 leaders readily tied, so that while I'm at the dam, I'm not busy struggling with cutting and measuring leaders. You don't want to do that. Time is of the essence. You need to get your rods in as quickly as possible. Then as far as your hook lines go, so as I said earlier on, most guys would recommend you use 8-pound, 7-pound line, you know, for your hook lines, simply because you want it to lift up or be as light as possible. Another reason for using very light hook line, lighter than what your main line is, if you get stuck in the grass and you're busy yanking on that rig of yours, you want your hook lines to break. You don't want to lose an entire rig. So when that happens, or you're fighting a fish and a little piece gets stuck and you're giving it a bit of a tug, obviously you've got the fish could also get lost, but at least you've just got that little bit of a hook line that's attached to it. If you go thicker on your hook lines, which lots of guys tend to do, then you won't get that rig out. You'll tend to break your line. Your main line will break somewhere in the middle. And then obviously some guys tend to use braid on their hook links as well. I don't like that. It's not allowed in our competitions, but I don't like it simply because it doesn't stretch out and make a straight line when it lands in the water. It tends to just crumple up, and that's not the perfect scenario that you want. Okay, so then the last thing I'd say you should have in your box, in your tackle box, is a nail clipper or a little cutter like that. I prefer the nail clipper. It tends to stay sharper for a longer time. This one tends to rust up quite a bit after a bit of use. So the nail clipper, you can really cut those knots of yours as fine as possible with the nail clipper, and the line gets in there. Nice little tool to have in your box. But that's all from me, guys. That's what lines are all about. I'm sure we'll do another session on lines when it comes to knots, and I can show you how I use it in my own gear. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and share.